Chair of BCARM, so the Botanic Gardens Collections and Records Management Group. This is our final plant forum for the year, so it's great to see lots of new faces here today. We've got a great lineup today, a slight change in our middle speaker, but that's okay. We've got something else very exciting lined up for you. So if you haven't already, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. It's really great to see different gardens here and get in contact. Feel free to use the chat throughout the session and just have a little natter with people. And if you haven't already, just please mute yourself if you're not speaking. We'll have time for questions between each speaker, so either drop them in the chat or kind of raise your hand and I'll see you there. So first up we have Amanda Shade from Kings Park, and I'm going to throw over to you, Amanda.
Sure. All right, welcome everybody. Just bear with me while I do this screen sharing. Hopefully this is going to work. Ooh. No, is that working? Can you see?
We can see your PowerPoint, but not at full screen
Oh,
yet.
Is that full screen now?
Yep, you're good to go.
Brilliant, excellent. So thanks for that. Sorry about those technical difficulties. I knew something would go wrong. Hi everybody. So my name's Amanda. I'm the nursery curator / collections manager / trainee coordinator here at Kings Park and Botanic Garden. And I'm giving a little talk about one of our seed collection projects that we've been running for the last couple of years. So we've had a seed collector on staff here at Kings Park and Botanic Gardens in Perth since the early 1960s, which really was just prior to the official opening of the Western Australian Botanic Garden in 1965. We're quite a young botanic garden, I suppose. So our seed collector contributes really important support to our botanic gardens functions by collecting, processing, testing and storing seed of Western Australian species from all over the state for the purposes of conservation, horticultural displays, plant breeding, restoration and also research. So in 2020, we were given some significant funding from the Western Australian Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development, which formerly was our Agriculture Department here in WA. And that was really to strengthen our seed collections of species within the Myrtaceae family, really as a preparedness action against a possible incursion of myrtle rust into Western Australia. I'm not going to go into myrtle rust in too much detail. I'm sure you're all really familiar with it. We don't have it here in Western Australia yet. We do anticipate that it is coming. So this was really a preparedness action through not just us, but a range of different agencies and departments here in WA. So back in 2020, our entire seed bank contained more than 13,000 accessions, representing approximately 3,500 species of Western Australian taxa, and around 22% of that collection was from the Myrtaceae family. So this was really an incredible opportunity to contribute towards safeguarding the future of more of these really sort of important species. Our collection strategy really was based on information and guidance from those of you with experience on the East Coast and in New Zealand where myrtle rust occurs. And we considered things like environmental conditions most favourable to the pathogen, potential avenues of introduction, and also known susceptible species to develop target lists. And those lists were then prioritised by interrogating our existing collections as a starting point. So we identified those that weren't present in our collection, or those that we had really low volumes of seed stored for, or the seed had a low viability, or those that hadn't been collected in quite a long time. And we used sort of pre-2000 as our benchmark for that. We also divided the list into the Southwest Province and the Northwest Province. So as you can imagine, we had some pretty extensive lists with the amount of species that we have here in WA. With consideration given to all of that, we planned a series of field trips over our traditional seed collecting season, which runs from sort of around late winter to late summer. Our focus for the first year, so for the 2020-2021 collecting season, was on the Southwest region between Shark Bay and the Fitzgerald River National Park on the south coast, which is down near Esperance. You can see on that map that I've attached there. We looked at within 150 kilometres of the coast. That's a pretty generous distance. Most collections were actually closer than that to the coast. And we undertook a total of 6 extended trips and multiple day trips, which equated to about 50 to 55 days in the field. And while our seed collector was the constant on those trips, each different trip also afforded the opportunity for a different horticultural and conservation staff member to accompany our seed collector. So that really increased collection training awareness and also lots of different other opportunities across our staff base. So our 2020-21 season has resulted in 73 different collections from 67 species. These were predominantly single provenance collections, although some species that had a wider range were collected more than once, where possible. Once the seed comes back to the park in Perth, it's stored in an ambient drying room, which you can see on the left there. It's cleaned and processed. We weigh them. We x-ray them for viability, and then they're germination tested under lab conditions and finally frozen in our seed bank. All our processes are based on Millennium Seed Bank best practice, and our Botanic Garden botanist also verifies the associated vouchers and submits them for lodgement at the State Herbarium here in Perth. And currently, of our most recent collections, probably 90% of those have had a confirmed ID. As I mentioned, each seed lot is x-rayed to determine the seed fill percentage, and this x-ray shows a sample collection of, I think it's Eucalyptus marginata subspecies Thalassica that was shown in an earlier slide. That's not the final sort of x-ray, but that's probably looking at that as an initial view would be about 50% viability or 50% seed fill. Once we have those weights and viability data, we can really determine how much total viable seed we have for each collection, which is really important data. We also, so representative samples from each seed lot are also photographed using a Leica digital microscope camera, which is always pretty fun. And as mentioned, we undertake germination tests. So the results from these are recorded in our plant database. And as per the Millennium Seed Bank best practice, the aim will be to perform similar tests in 10 years to help inform sort of future decisions around our collection. The results also of any viability and germination testing are really important and greatly assist our nursery team in determining how much seed we will likely need in order to generate certain numbers for things like display and restoration and other projects. So where to next, now that we're sort of into the next phase of this project? So we're currently building on adding more species. We're looking at multiple provenance collections and clonal hardy collections, particularly of known highly susceptible species like Agonis, which you can see on the left, and Camelorsium on the right, which there's a picture of some that we're bagging there. So this is what we're doing for the 2021-22 collecting season. Our focus at the moment is mainly on day trips from the Perth region, with a couple of longer trips further afield. We're also potentially looking at a mid-year Kimberley region trip in 2022, given that we've recently discovered that myrtle rust has been detected in the territory less than 100 k's from the WA border, so that's a bit of a concern. And there is our brand new seed collector or curator of our seed centre, Matt Stray, who is attending here today. Sorry, Matt, I snuck that one in there. So Matt's very enthusiastically and methodically leading the charge on the continuation of this project. And that's him with his very first field collection. And finally, I guess this experience has been a really worthwhile undertaking for us here, apart from the important task of safeguarding many potentially vulnerable and susceptible species. This project has also really added value to our collection in general. It's also really allowed us to interrogate our current holdings, have a greater understanding about what we're storing, why we're storing it, the value of our collections, and to have really more considered discussions about what we're maintaining and why. And that is it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. That was really interesting.
That was quick.
Yeah. Lots of time for questions. Does anyone
Sorry.
have? All right. Does anyone have any questions for Amanda or maybe for Matt, who's on the call as well, about that project? Can't see everyone, so if you have got a burning question, wave your hand or just unmute. I have one for maybe Matt or Amanda around how do you capture that information that comes through those different experiments from the germination work? Are you collating that in your database and providing that to other gardens? What does that look like?
Do you want to answer that, Matt?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, we've got very thorough records of all our germination testing data, and yeah, I suppose that feeds through to the seed propagators and nursery staff, sort of first and foremost. Yeah, Amanda will be constantly sort of referring to that information. Yeah, that's recorded in our plant database, which all staff have, trained staff have access to. So and hopefully should be able to use that information to sort of guide and inform their work and their decisions at work. And yeah, like Amanda mentioned, we would be aiming to repeat those tests over time as well. So you might get some variation in some results. Is there anything further, Amanda, you'd?
The only other thing I would mention is that we have a really strong relationship with our science department here. So a lot of the species that we have traditionally collected, they're first-time collections, and when we're looking at germination testing, Myrtaceae is probably not so much an issue, but some of the other families that we collect, they've never been propagated before. They're new to cultivation. We don't really know what we're doing. So we have, we really do sort of lean on our science ecologists, seed scientists to give us some guidance about things like pre-treatments. There's a lot of recalcitrant species, storage conditions, all of that sort of thing. And all of that information is really valuable. And we do put all of that into our database as well. It's a very robust system, so it can capture an enormous amount of data. And it's good historical. It's good historically to look at, that we might be germination testing some things and getting really low results, but there could be some variable that we've missed that we need to just change up, I suppose. So yeah, it's a huge body of data that we've got accessible.
Awesome. Yeah, I asked mainly because we have a propagator who's just left after kind of 15 years, and
oh no,
knowledge is all in her brain, and so it really shows the importance of implementing this somewhere that's retrievable and not relying on people being around. Yep. Ben, did you have a question? I think I saw you wave.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Look, this is either for Amanda or Matt. With some of those little net bags that you had on some of those plants before in the photos, is the main purpose of that for collecting the seed or to prevent cross-pollination? And how do you go with the cross-pollination point of view?
Yeah, good question, Ben. Thanks. In that case, yeah, those bags were put on to collect the seed of those primarily. Yeah, it's sort of early days for myself, but I understand, collecting Camelosium seed can be a bit tricky when getting the timing right.
Yep.
So hopefully, having those bags on will sort of give us, that it's got to, I suppose, increase that sort of that window of, and hopefully we won't miss too much of them as they drop. So yeah, there's a few different populations up there that we're targeting at this stage. So we'll keep those separate. Obviously, probably a bit of cross-pollination going on within that those small areas where those populations occur, but we've just sort of keep those individual collections separate.
Cool, thank you.
We've got another question from Martin in the chat. What's your process on where to look in the wild? Which might be kind of a question, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Martin, but definitely for New Zealand gardens, we don't actually have botanists in our botanic gardens, and we don't necessarily have science departments, so we kind of rely on other people's information. So kind of interested to hear what your process is.
Yeah, there's a lot of planning involved in our trips, I'm finding out. So getting that target species list sort of nailed down initially, and then you've really got to sort of interrogate each species and work out the range of the population, and then look at past collections, and how long ago these collections took place, and how abundant the species was in that location. Probably some big things we'd be considering.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as Amanda mentioned, we'd ideally like to collect right across the range of the population where it's feasible to pick up those different important characteristics and traits.
We also have access to our state herbarium records of previous collections, so we can sort of interrogate that data, put it into a mapping system as well. That's a really good starting point for us. It kind of takes the guesswork out of it.
Yeah, that's great. Is that that mapping, is that something that's internal to you, or is it a Australian thing?
What's the program that you use, Matt? I forget.
So initially we're referring to Florabase, and then take that information. Florabase is available generally to the public at certain levels, and taking that information and bringing it into Aussie Explorer mapping software that we use out in the field.
Cool. Sounds like some opportunities, Martin, for us to develop something similar in New Zealand. So I don't see any other questions, but if you do, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm sure Amanda and Matt will have a look at those. So I'm going to next pass over to Tex, Moon and Andrea, and they're going to talk a little bit about a project on the Dandenong Ranges. So over to you, Tex.
Thank you. I will get my screen shared. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep, you're good to go.
Good to go. Thank you very much, and thanks. It's great to see such a good turnout. So for those that don't know me, I am Tex Moon, Ranger Team Leader for Dandenong Rangers Gardens Team, Parks Victoria. And I'm going to have presenting with me Andrea Proctor of Andrea Proctor Landscapes, and I'll get Andrea to probably introduce herself as I throw to her in the presentation. But this presentation is about the Australian Cloud Forest Collection. So it's a new feature garden design for us up here in the Dandenong Ranges Botanic Garden in Olinda, and it's designed to showcase and conserve endangered flora from Queensland's wet tropics World Heritage Area, and specifically for us to focus on the Australian native rhododendrons. So for those that don't know our garden, it's the Dandenong Ranges Botanic Garden. We're located in Olinda, which is 50 k's east of Melbourne. We're about 40 hectares in size, but we've recently annexed another 6.4 hectares from the former Olinda Golf Course, which is actually the site for where this garden will be. We were first established in 1960 by the Australian Rhododendron Society, and we served as the National Rhododendron Garden until we were formally gazetted as Dandenong Ranges Botanic Garden in 2017. So we've had a huge community involvement with the Rhodie Society, the Australian Rhododendron Society, and they set up the place, and they're still here weekly, and they've played a humongous part in this project, both from a funding point of view and involvement in the working group. We are a cool climate botanic garden in the context of Australia and Victoria, obviously, and I guess what that means is that On average, we're about 5 degrees cooler than Melbourne, and we get about double the rainfall and maybe a bit more some years. So really good opportunities for growing plants that are hard to grow off the mountain. So this project itself, it focuses on 9 different mountain peak locations, all in and around Cairns, so just both south and north of Cairns, all above 950 meters altitude. And all of these peaks, these ecosystems are unique, not just nationally, but globally. Many of the species, both plants and animals, are found nowhere else on Earth, which is one of the reasons the wet tropics were inscribed on the World Heritage Register in 1988. It's been ranked 8th out of more than 173,000 protected areas worldwide for irreplaceability based on its extraordinary total species diversity, and 6th on the basis of globally threatened species alone. So climate modelling predicts that this area could be subject to drastic habitat loss within as little as 15 years, with droughts in the cloud forest being longer, hotter, drier, and more frequent. So basically, this is a particularly special area, but significantly threatened. So this project itself, we're part of a bigger project called the Tropical Mountain Plants Science Project. So very much a multi-agency project. There's possibly people on the meeting today who would be involved in this project in some form. And I just wanted to share this slide just to show, I guess, that level of involvement. Again, both from project partners, funding point of view. It's led by the Australian Tropical Herbarium and James Cook University, and obviously in partnership with the traditional owners, Western Yulunjik Traditional Owner Group. And the byline pretty much says it all. It's securing the future of Australia's climate-threatened tropical mountaintop plants by building a multi-strategy ex situ conservation reserve to back up at-risk wild populations and to support research, display, and education. So I guess that's where we fit into the project. So there's been multiple collecting trips. I think the first one's dated back to 2016. I haven't been lucky enough to be on any of them yet, but again, there may actually be people on the meeting who were involved in these. And I want to share these slides just to give an understanding of, I guess, the diversity of the landscape that we're talking about there. It's one in our early design conversations, which Andrea will probably touch on, but one of the stories that really resonated from these collecting trips is how the landscape and plant communities change so dramatically as you traverse up and through the mountaintops. So you can see we go from thick, barely penetrable rainforest to these massive rocky outcrops to sort of more savanna kind of grassland areas. I've put this one into the right just to show off the native rhododendrons growing in amongst the rocks. As I previously stated, these plants will be a major focus for the garden. And it was also these species that inspired the initial collecting trips, which then led to this greater sort of tropical mountain plant science project. So Australia's rhododendrons. Many of you will know that we do actually have native species of rhododendrons, even though we tend to think of them as mostly northern hemisphere plants with the sort of equatorial Viraya group. But the two species, rhododendron lockii and rhododendron vireosum. So lockii occurs on the mountain peaks south of Cairns and is distinct by these curved corollas, as opposed to vireosum, which occurs on the peaks north of Cairns and has much shorter and straighter tubular corollas. And it's worth noting that at the moment the literature hasn't caught up, and I think we can still only formally recognise one species of rhododendron, but part of the objective, the outcomes of this project was to actually collect the suitable DNA testing material And that DNA testing has been done, and it does support earlier works that propose the 2 species. So we will see that there is 2 species, which we all know, but at the moment not formally recognised. Now, we haven't got to the point of finalising our planting list yet, but I thought it's always worth putting a bit of plant eye candy up on the screen. So this is some of the target species from the collecting trips, and these will be incorporated into the landscape and to accompany the rhododendrons. And I just thought I'd provide this slide just to just get the context of where this will be situated. So for those that don't know, a front entrance is up here. It comes off what's called the Georgian Road in Alinda. Enter and exit through the gift shop, our depots and everything here. This yellow line represents the existing garden, but it actually stretches at probably another kilometre north of that. This area over here is the new annexed area of land that I was talking about, the new 6.4 hectares. So the Australian Cloud Forest collection will sit directly above our lake, which is one of our main visitor nodes, and we'll obviously be looking at connections and everything through to this new site. So the project itself has been funded through the DELP Department of the Environmental Department's Growing Victoria's Botanic Gardens and Botanic Gardens grant program, and also by the Australian Rhododendron Society. And big part of that is quite a notable bequest from one of the late members, Simon Begg, which we're very, very grateful for. So because we've received this funding, we've been able to engage the services of the landscape architect Andrea Proctor, who I'm going to throw to now to talk about her design. Are you there, Andrea?
Thanks, Tex. I was muted. Sorry about that, everyone. So yes, I'm Andrea Proctor. I've got a small landscape architecture and horticulture firm, and even though I'm a bit of a ring-in in this crowd being in the private sector, I've been working with Victoria's Regional Botanic Gardens for well over 10 years now. And at the moment, we've got projects with 8 botanic gardens across Victoria and southern New South Wales, which is pretty exciting. And I know a few people we're working with are here today. This project is pretty special though. The collections and the story and the landscape we're trying to capture, but on a personal level too. I'm Dandenong Ranges born and bred. I've lived most of my life here, and it's fantastic to have a project that is so close to home in many ways. So the design for the new garden, we were very heavily influenced by the stories that came from the collection trips, and we were wanting to sort of draw on that in the design of the project. We had a working group involving Parks Victoria, the Rhododendron Society, Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria. Warren Warboys was on it. They're working with Parks Vic to propagate the material. And we asked them a series of questions to try and sort of learn as much as we could about those collecting trips and what it was like without actually being there, because the brief was to capture that environment. And you've seen some of those photos we text with those massive granite boulders. The Barron River runs through there, and just the sheer diversity of plant species. This is off the top of my head, so I could be wrong, and if anyone knows, correct me, but there's something like 40 different genera of Proteaceae between the mountaintops and sea level in this area, which is just mind-blowing. We were also inspired by the vegetation itself. A lot of the plants, particularly the rhododendrons, are lithophytic. They grow on rocks. And also a lot of the plants are really quite tall. They're small trees, large shrubs, and anyone who's done much work with landscape architects and planting designers would know that we don't tend to go for large shrubs. They're sort of hard to turn into welcoming gardens. So we really, this garden was all about showing off the plant species, so we really had to make sure we could use them well. But perhaps the biggest thing was, which Tex touched on, was those stories about how the vegetation changed, and people like Dan from Dandenong Rangers and Warren War Boys and Prue Chrome, who gave us some of these photos from the ARS, they said as you were walking up the mountains, the vegetation would literally change within a matter of meters. You'd be walking through one vegetation type and then, wow, you're in a completely different one. And then, of course, you've got all those big rocks. So we're really wanting to capture that sense of things changing as you move through the space. So can I have the next slide, please, Tex? So this is the design for the project. So it is in a former golf course. So fortunately, that meant the land was slightly less steep than this, but not a lot. So we're working with the land there, and there's a beautiful view, which you'll see later, from that site down to the main lake at the in the traditional part of the Botanic Gardens. And so we're wanting to actually put a beautiful steel boardwalk down to connect that with a viewing platform longer term. But that I'll sort of try and focus on the Australian Cloud Forest collection. So even though we were trying to capture all these beautiful things about where these plants came from and show off the plants themselves, we also wanted the garden we knew had to respond to the site in Olinda. It had to work in that particular space. And there were a few site-specific issues to deal with, namely issues with stormwater collection and treatment. At the moment, there's issues with stormwater coming through the gardens unfiltered and into the lake. And we saw this as an opportunity to play off that idea of the barren river there and potentially longer term get some water treatment wetlands through there and a beautiful creek that runs through and around the garden there. So you feel as you're walking in on the path there that you're next to the river, which is very much what it's like up in Queensland there. And the path meanders, slowly getting more meandering and through big rocks. And then you move through sort of this dense band of those taller plants I was talking about. And we really wanted to play on that feeling once the garden's established of moving through different vegetation types. So the idea is you're moving through a fairly open landscape and then it'll become very enclosed. And then the main collection garden opens out in front of you. And you'll be surrounded by those plants with a few key views, one down to the lake. So you capture that beautiful view outwards and those peaks that sort of feeling of being raised up on the peaks like they had in Queensland. And there's a view in from the top path through down, which is the beautiful render artist impression that Tamsin did. That was the first slide and we'll come back to. So the idea is that once you're in that space, you enter that space through big rocks, and we're talking sort of rocks that are sort of overhead height. We can't get anything nearly as big as what was in Queensland, but we can still have that feeling of being amongst big rocks. And then in the centre of the space, some of those rocks will have plants planted up on them, the rhododendrons, little dendrobium orchids. The focus is on the collection and the target species, but we know we're going to have to supplement that with some plants that just perform well in Olinda and which have a bit of eye candy for the public. So there'll be plants up on rocks. We're going to saw some of those rocks in half and stuff plants growing out in the middle of them. If you know the Weird and Wonderful Garden at Cranbourne, they're doing that down there with the locky eyes. And there'll be a beautiful little viewing deck that just provides a bit of a view outwards and a connection to the main Botanic Garden. The idea too is that we may, at that beginning of that boardwalk up from the lake, we may have a little outpost of the collection down there as well, just to sort of invite people up and sort of say, hey, come on guys, there's something good up here. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the sort of images and inspiration. Obviously there's the native rhododendrons and the giant rocks. Some viewing decks, and you can see a couple of little sections over to the left there where you've got that sort of main entrance up in the top left corner with the rocks with the rhododendrons planted off the top of them, and you can see there what we're trying to achieve as far as size goes. And the idea is you wouldn't see into the space until you actually move through those rocks. So that's really playing up that feeling of that sudden change. The centre of the space has a little sort of, we're calling it it's almost a folly, but again, it will have the rocks, it'll have the cut rocks, it'll have the planted rocks. It's a bit more human scale, and I guess the inspiration was a little bit particularly somewhere like Gardens by the Bay in Singapore, there's a lot of plants that are sort of right up and in your face, and Botanic Gardens at Melbourne, Guildford's old work does it as well. But the idea is that there's almost a little gallery there where people can really stop and focus in on the detail of those plants. And there's some beautiful timber seats there. Next slide, please, Tex. And here's just a few more details. So we're hoping to make some reclaimed timber seats. That was in the design from the start. But as most of you would know, the Dandenong suffered a pretty devastating storm in June. So there is now a lot of timber around. A lot of it's not really suitable for immediate milling, but we're hoping that we can use some of the timber lost from that storm. And next slide. And this Australian Cloud Forest Garden sits in the wider plans for the annex, which this is sort of a schematic master plan, which we did at the same time as the design for the Australian Cloud Forest Garden. And the idea with this annex longer term is that it will focus on conservation work. And that could be Australian species, it could be overseas species. There's a lot of at-risk rhododendrons. So the idea is that this will gradually be developed as a conservation garden. Next slide, Tex. So this is the site at the moment. So this is going along one of the old golf greens, looking down to the main lake with those big, beautiful eucalyptus regnans, down to the little shelter down at the lake. And ta-da, next slide, Tex. And this is the artist's impression of what the garden will look like. So you can see the rhododendrons around the edge. They may not end up being quite as brilliant. There's a couple of specimens that are really very florific, and there's others that are a little bit more subdued. But the idea is let's really focus in on those rhododendrons. You can see that little folly in the centre there with all the really beautiful plants in there. The plants up on the rocks around the entrance and that view down towards the lake. I'll throw back to you now, Tex.
Thanks, Andrea. And that was the end of it. I just stopped sharing a moment too early. I did have a thank you page at the end. So thank you everyone for listening. And thanks, Andrea, for that. It's a really exciting project that, so where we're at with it essentially is we're pretty much right at the end of the design phase. Currently out with a consultant for engineering reports on the sort of elements that need that engineering, and hoping to sort of have construction crews engaged sort of before the end of the year, and getting this summer. So we know we can't really construct in the Dandenongs in the winter. So that's the plan. But yeah, thank you. And I guess if we've got time, we can throw to questions.
Thank you both. Thanks, Andrea and Tex. That was great. I'm really excited to come visit you when we're allowed out of our bubble. So does anyone have any questions? Feel free to just unmute yourself. We've got time. Oh, Virginia, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes. Tex, when are you likely to get it finished?
Good question. So the aim at the moment, as I say, we're still working on the final planting lists. There's a lot of plants already propagated down at the Australian Garden Cranbourne, RBGV. So, but the idea at the moment is to really focus in on the hard landscaping part of it and the design and construct, and then exactly when we estimate that part of it, once we get sort of turn aside, would be around I guess 6 to 10 week build or something like that. Depending on a lot of factors, as we know over the last 2 years, most plans get delayed. So and then we would look at the planting out. So as far as open to the public, it's a bit up in the air at the moment, but we expect to have some time to establish plants and everything, because at this point the connections to that site are actually not funded. So we're out looking for funding for those connections, but seeing that as a bit of a positive as well, because it will give us the time to get plants in the ground and as I say, get them established before we sort of.
So this time next year?
Yes.
Or is that too early?
No, look, Yeah, it's
I'm
probably too early to
independent.
say, really, really more than anything. I'd love to put a date on it. But yeah.
I was thinking of next year, this time next year, there's a Botanic Guides of Australia and New Zealand conference. And I was wondering if we could bring them up to see it. I'll come back to you on that.
I reckon we can have that discussion, Virginia, and I reckon you can bring them up regardless. There's plenty to show.
True.
But yeah, look, yeah, let's talk about that and
Awesome.
see how we go.
Time for one more question if anyone has any. Can't see any hands waving, but I'll certainly just say that I loved your Freycinetia. I feel like we're the poor cousins in New Zealand. You get the orange one and we get the white one. Martin, do you want to just unmute and ask that one, Martin? It's a question text around funding.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Two-part question. Don't mind if you don't mind, if you don't have to answer the first one. But how much is the outline cost, and how's that been funded?
How much is the total cost? We have estimated that, Andrea. I think it was for the actual cloud forest collection part of it. I think we're in the vicinity of 300.
Yeah, 300, 350 for the cloud forest. It's the connections that are the issue.
Yeah,
it's
obviously.
A greenfield site.
That's right. Yeah. So developing something on a greenfield site where we don't have connections or services. There is a concurrent project happening, which is some may have heard of it, the Philip Johnson Chelsea award-winning garden that he's replicating on our site. So there's some really good opportunities there for us to sort of get some mutually beneficial funding towards getting the connections to that site. So the two places at the moment that we've got funding from is that, so we're lucky the department in Victoria, actually there's probably a few people online that got Growing Victoria's Botanic Gardens funding. So we did get a chunk of money out of that, and that was towards the design and construct of this project, and then a second round of funding towards the irrigation component of that site, and then the Australian Rhododendron Society are also funding a large component of it as well, and that was partially through there. I mean, they have quite a bit of funding, but also there was a large bequest from one of their members who passed recently, who was heavily involved in the initial collecting trips to look at which was specifically looking at the native rhododendrons. So yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. Great.
So we'd love more. We don't have quite enough just yet, but we've got the great design work and everything to sort of go out for these funding bids as the opportunities arrive. So.
I'll take 10% of that. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Tex and Andrea. So for our last speaker, we have Ben, who's a horticultural ranger at Dandenong Ranges Botanic Gardens. So throw over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Emma. So I'm here today to talk about my favourite plant, which is a bit of a hard one. It's like asking a musician their favourite song. So anyway, I've picked one. So share my screen. All right. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yep, you're good.
Yeah, cool. All right, so my plant that I've picked is Leptospermum gingira. Common name is stringy bark tea tree. So now for the past, I don't know, I think it's 6 to 8 years, we've been a part of the Care for the Rare conservation sort of project with RBGV. And in that, we've got a collection of Victorian alpine plants in that Care for the Rare collection. One of them has been Leptospermum gingira. So to me, this is one of my favorite plants. So the larger branches have a papery habit, with the bark. So they sheds off in layers, while the younger stems and flower buds are silky with silver hairs, as you can see in those photos, and a bit of more of a pink tinge to them. its small white flowers appear from mid-November to January and reach a diameter of 10 millimeters. The flowers of the Leptospermum gingira cover the plant, and from a distance it almost looks like snow. It presents an amazing show, while many insects such as bees and native bees and hoverflies pretty much cover the flowers. It's pretty amazing, like you can hear them humming and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. So another characteristic that stands out alongside its papery bark and mass volume of flowers is its weeping habit. So mainly the new growth sort of hangs down a little bit, as you can see in that middle image. But as it gets older, the mature branches still do the same thing overall. So that plant that you can see in the middle, so all of these photos have been taken from our specimens here at the Botanic Gardens. And that middle photo now, that was planted in 2014. So that's a few years old now, and it's probably reaching around 2 meters. And yeah, so from our experience here at the gardens, they tend to cope quite well, both in, reasonably wet areas, but also more dry areas where they don't get a lot of water. And even in the drought years, they've tend to cope pretty good as well. It's endemic to Victoria, and whilst its status is still only vulnerable, it is quite rare as a plant, as the only 2 known populations in the wild are located at Brumby Point, area of the Nuniong Plateau, and also a population in the Snowy Range, which both of those locations are in the Vic Alps. And it occurs in shrubland and low woodland areas of these particular locations. All right, so yeah, so thanks for that. Any questions?
Awesome, thanks Ben, that was great. Is there anyone who would like to ask Ben a question? Ben, do you know if it's highly susceptible to myrtle rust?
Not in particular.
Okay. Cherie?
Hi, I'm Jenny. I'm sitting here with Cherie. Just curious, what sort of conditions does it grow in where you're growing it?
We're growing it like it's in pretty much, I don't know, it gets every element pretty much. So it faces the east, and pretty much it's on a slope, but it does get, it gets pretty hot down there. It's reasonably wet. There's sort of some springs there as well. But we have got it in areas in the same collection where it does get very dry. And we only really needed to water them for the first couple of years. So now that we don't water it, it still does quite well, even though it's established. We've just done another planting of them as well up in our new sort of, we've just started a collection of eucalypts that are in that care for the rare list as well. And we've planted some up there. I know this is sort of a wet season for us, a wet summer, and the same with last year, but they tend to be doing quite well as well. And it is a lot drier up there. So we have sort of got them in both conditions, in full elements, and they tend to do all right.
Okay, thanks for that.
No worries.
Great question. Anyone else got a question for Ben? Speak now, forever hold your peace. Doesn't look like we have any more questions, but I just want to thank all our speakers for today. Those talks were excellent. I learnt a lot from you all. So this is our last BCARM Plant Forum for the year, but do not fret, we have a plan for next year. So our first forum will start again in February. And that will be a couple of speakers that will be talking specifically about collecting records and how to store and maintain records in terms of ex situ conservation. So I think that it will be really relevant for many of us. So I will send those details out early next year. Just if anyone is interested, there's a Hortus reference group meeting in 10 minutes. So if you are interested and you hadn't heard of that or anything, flick me an email and I will send you the details. And other than that, we'll see you next year for the next plant forum. Thank you all for joining.
Can I jump in quickly and just say a big thank you to Emma, I think on behalf of everyone, but also specifically on behalf of BCARM and BCARM for putting all these together over the last, how many have we had now? The last 3 or 4 of them. But it's they continue to be really, really great content, and I think it's been a really great, maybe opportunistic thing out of the last sort of 2 years to sort of moved onto these online platforms and better connect all together. So thanks, Emma, for all your hard work.
Thanks, Tex. And if anyone is interested and would like to give a talk, you can see there's a real range of talks that we include. So please sing out, because these will only happen if you guys put your names forward. So we'd love to hear from as many of you as possible. All right. Thanks all.
Thank you.
See you, everyone.
Thank you.